Thank you everyone for joining us for the business value of developer relations. So first off, let's just start with some webinar cheat sheet information. The audio is available through your computer or via your phone. All attendees are automatically muted, so we can't hear you, sorry. But if you want to communicate with us, you can use the question panel shown here. So you can ask those questions and ask away, and Mary will get to all your wonderful questions at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm Adrian. I'm the voice you've been hearing up to now. I am the head of community at Vanilla Forums. And if you don't know, Vanilla is a hosted forum platform used by many companies to connect with their communities. It's also used by a lot of developer communities. So just a small taste of our customers that use our platform include the Linux Foundation, Xamarin, Oculus, their developer community, and many more companies looking to build an online space with their developers. We also like to focus on educating and supporting the community of those building these spaces. So with that in mind, we're so happy and pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Mary Thengvall, who will be talking to us all today about the business value of developer relations. So thank you, Mary, for joining us today. And if you're not familiar with Mary, Mary is a connector of people at heart, both personally and professionally. She loves digging into strategy of how to build and foster developer communities and has been doing so for over 10 years. After building community programs at O'Reilly Media, Chef Software, and SparkPost, she's now consulting for companies looking to build out a developer relations strategy. She's also the author of the first book on developer relations, The Business Value of Developer Relations. Thanks for being here, Mary.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Adrian.
So I'll let you take away the slides.
Cool. Sounds good. So, hi, everyone. As Adrian said, my name is Mary Thengvall. I'm the founder of Persea Consulting, and I'm really glad to be here talking to all of you today. You can find all of my basic information on the screen in front of you, including my Twitter and my personal website, where I have a blog and speaking engagements and more about some of the projects that I'm working on, as well as other ancillary information. But before I dive in, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background for those of you who don't know me. I have a journalism background originally, but I've worked with various technical communities for over a decade now, and I've noticed more than a few patterns along the way. One of the biggest patterns that I've noticed is that many companies simply don't understand the business value of community building, and more specifically, developer relations. So as a result, I founded Persea Consulting in late 2017. The goal of Persea Consulting is to provide resources and education about developer relations and community management, both for those who are practicing in those areas, as well as the business decision makers who are trying to figure out what in the world those terms mean. And in doing so, my overarching mission is to advance the developer relations industry as a whole. These logos on the screen are a handful of the resources that I provide as part of the school. The most relevant one for today is the book on the far left up there, The Business Value of Developer Relations. A lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about today is also covered in the book in far more depth. And as you might have seen in the promotions for the webinar, the marketing team at Vanilla has 5 copies of my book to hand out to attendees who are here today, which is exciting. So stay tuned for more information about that later. But all this to say, I do a lot of things, newsletter, podcast, Slack team for DevRel folks. And I've got a lot of side projects, and I'm very involved in a lot of things around the community. But most importantly, I'm incredibly passionate about driving the developer relations and community management industry forward and working with companies to make sure that both the communities that you're building and the DevRel professionals that you're employing are set up for success. And today I'm going to talk to you about just that, how to set up a DevRel team for success within your company. These principles are going to apply to you whether you're in DevRel trenches or simply DevRel curious. So first, we're going to touch on what is developer relations, including the difference between community management and DevRel. But then we'll answer that question, and then we'll move on to asking why we need to advocate for DevRel, because it's a buzzword in our community these days. So there's the logical question of, well, why do we actually need to make a case for this? And after that, we'll explore why we need to put resources behind building relationships with developers, because there's a lot of folks who think we can just set up a developer welcome page and that's all we need, right? We'll also touch on setting expectations internally with stakeholders and board members, and then I'll close you out on a few tips on where you can start. So buckle up, because we're covering a lot of information today. But first of all, let's make sure that we're all on the same page with definitions. So what is developer relations? And let's first address the elephant in the room. There are avocado versions of people on the front of my book cover. As you might have noticed, there's an avocado logo for the DevRel Collective Slack team. And if you're particularly observant, you'll have noticed that my business logo is an abstract avocado as well. So why avocados? And why people made to look like avocados, because this is me on your screen. So besides the fact that they're amazingly delicious, and I can say that because I liked them before avocado toast took over my wonderful city of San Francisco, but developer relations has become known as the good kind of fat within some tech circles. This was an analogy that picked up steam about 3 years ago when I was working with the developer relations team at SparkPost, an email API service based here in San Francisco. And it all started because one of the project managers had a hard time saying developer advocate when she got to talking quickly. And instead, it often came out as developer avocado. Given how much my coworker Adrian loved avocados, he took on the mantle of developer avocado without much prompting. And then as the team grew, we became known as the developer avocado team. So we decided to own this title, not only internally, but externally as well. And pretty soon, an analogy was born. You see, as a notoriously expensive department with sponsorships and swag and travel, a general lack of traditional ROI numbers such as lead generation, we've become known as a fatty department or an expensive department. But I'd argue that we're the good kind of fat, and that when used in the right ways at the right times with the right combination of items, our efforts can result in an incredibly healthy and beneficial time, not only for our community, but for our company. So with that explanation about the avocados in mind, let's move forward. I'm starting with a definition about community instead of developer relations because I believe in order for us to define developer relations, we first need to define community. I'm guessing most of you here today are aware of what community is at its essence, but here's the definition that I've been using for a few years that seems to ring true no matter what industry you're a part of. Community is a group of people who not only share common principles, but also develop and share practices that help individuals in the group thrive. And how you define who falls into the realm of community at your particular company will depend on what your intentions are. I cover a lot more about that in my book. But in general, community includes your current customers as well as your prospects and anyone who could in the future be interested in using your product. So how does this fit into developer relations? So developer relations, or DevRel, is the umbrella term for the team whose primary responsibility is building a community, both online and offline. This includes developer advocacy, developer event management, community management, etc. It can even go so far as to include roles like documentation or developer education and training at some bigger companies like Twilio or Microsoft. But at its foundation, the purpose of DevRel is to build relationships with the developer community. DevRel professionals act as a liaison between their company and the developer audience, typically the end users of the product. While most professionals have the best interests of the business at the front of their minds, driving their day-to-day decisions, DevRel professionals have the best interest of the community as their driving factor. They, of course, care about the success of the business as well. It is, after all, what pays their bills, but they understand that if the community is happy and successful as a result of using the product, the business is far more likely to succeed as well. I like this little mantra to explain that symbiotic relationship. To the community, I represent the company. To the company, I represent the community. I must have both of their interests in mind at all times. And in order for the DevRel team to succeed, they must also be fully supported by the company. From having a clear set of business goals and expectations to the right tools for the job, they need to know that their work is seen as valuable and is therefore not only allowed, but actively encouraged by the stakeholders in their company. This brings us back to why I'm here today, helping you understand the value of developer relations. So what's the difference between DevRel and community management? Honestly, it's not all that different. It's basically community management with a technical audience, which frankly has existed for decades through open source community management. So why is there a whole separate name and industry building up around it? The short answer is that when companies started creating developer-focused products, ones where the end user is a developer or someone who works with code on a daily basis, they needed technically minded people to communicate to the technical audience. So they started finding extroverted developers who were able to write technical content, willing to speak at conferences, and interested in helping the greater technical community understand why their particular product was one that they should be paying attention to right now. The biggest difference between traditional community management and developer relations is that you need tech-savvy individuals on the team. And you'll notice I said tech-savvy and not someone with a technical background. I'm very, very specific on this point, largely because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have a technical background. In fact, my journalism background is a huge asset for me, allowing me to make observations and draw patterns where others might not see the same correlations. It allows me to communicate with upper management on a business level about the needs of our community members, and then also translate the business speak back to the community members. And this is a key part of DevRel, as I mentioned earlier. To the community, I represent the company. To the company, I represent the community. And then having both of their interests in mind at all times. And so having a non-traditional, non-computer-oriented computer science developer background allows me to come with these other skills. So I know people who are in DevRel who have come from a theater background, or others with a journalism background like me, people with English literature backgrounds, and all of these different things that normally wouldn't be a shoe-in for someone who's working with a technical audience. But the different perspectives that we bring to the table allow us to communicate both with the company and with the community, respectively. So I prefer to look at DevRel and community management like this, not in competition with one another, but instead working together to achieve a complete goal, empowering and educating a technical community. So now that we have an understanding of what developer relations means, we can move on to our next question. Why do we need to advocate for developer relations? After all, DevRel and developer advocacy are huge buzzwords these days, which may make you think that we don't need to advocate for it internally. After all, I spread the word about 140 plus DevRel related jobs every week in DevRel Weekly, my newsletter, and that number is growing exponentially. I recently published a blog post with some data from my first year of running the newsletter that shows as much. And the link is down there in the bottom right if you're interested in data and nerding out about data like I did for the last few weeks. But despite its buzzwordiness, we still have an education problem among stakeholders and board members within these companies. Hiring a developer advocate or technical community manager has become a checkbox item, something that companies must have, but often one that they don't understand. So there may not always be a need to advocate for a team or a role to be created, but there is a need to provide the business value once the team has been created. Otherwise, if stakeholders don't understand the business value, best case scenario is you've got teams that wind up shoveled into a variety of jobs: social media management, sales, product implementation, etc. And none of these are a great fit. So you wind up with people, square pegs, round hole, right? They don't fit. It's not the job that they should be responsible for. Worst case scenario, the whole team gets dissolved because the stakeholders only see the money spent and not the value derived. But either way, you've got burnout, confusion, and frustration from basically the entire team. So when stakeholders, VPs, C-suite folks, or the board asks you what the point of DevRel is and what value that team brings to the table, what do you say? Do you, as community professionals, have an answer for them? Or, looking at it a different way, do you, as the board or C-suite member, know enough about the value that DevRel and community management can provide to know what goals and metrics to be asking for? And here's the real question behind the why. Why do we need to put resources behind building relationships that may or may not pay off in sales in the long run? Why not just put up a developer welcome page, letting devs know that we're there for them, and then let sales and marketing do their job with the buyers, right? We've got documentation, we've got technical account managers and customer support. We're exhibiting at developer conferences, telling people what we do, even if it's our, non-technical marketing staff that's going to them. So why do we need to take the time to actually build these relationships? If we build it, they will come, right? Not so much. The reality of the matter is developers don't just appear out of nowhere, magically having sensed that you have a developer site on your webpage now. This is where relationship building comes into play. But it's not just about spending money on developer events or buying community members a cup of coffee when they're in town. We need to put some actual goals behind this relationship building venture. So here's goal number 1, understand developer needs. And by understanding the true needs of our technical audience, we have a unique opportunity to meet those needs. But again, it's not magic. We don't just show up to a meetup one time and have developers lining up to tell us what their needs are. It takes time to build trust and have enough conversations with them to understand what the true needs are under the surface. So understanding our audience's needs can result in a number of questions. For instance, what needs can you already meet? This question can usually be answered really well by your sales department. They're on the phone with customers every day or potential customers every day, trying to give answers for how they can best fit a situation at a various company. What needs could you potentially meet in the future? Your product and engineering teams will have this answer with the roadmaps and the features that they're building out and things that are still coming down the pipeline. And then lastly, which needs aren't in your scope but could be accomplished through a partnership or integration? And this is usually a conversation for business development or your integrations team, figuring out, what companies can we work with? What might be the best scenario for someone who's looking for a slightly different situation or looking to hook our product onto another product? So ultimately, understanding the needs of our audience allows us to enable them, not to market to them or sell to them, though understanding their needs helps us help our teammates do that as well. But the role of the developer relations team is enablement. And I love this quote from Zan Markin's recent blog post. Enabled developers are productive, less likely to churn, and better suited to champion our products and services inside their teams, organizations, and wider networks. So what does this enablement look like? Well, first of all, it means your product is fulfilling a need that a developer has. It also means that once they've decided to use your product, developers can get up and running on your on your platform quickly. It means that once they're up and running, if they have any questions, there's a community ready and waiting to help if they run into any issues, perhaps on a platform like Vanilla. And lastly, it means if they do run into any problems, you're available and willing to hear their feedback. It also means that when you find a community member who may be a good fit for a project elsewhere in the company, you can make the appropriate introduction. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the term marketing qualified leads, the idea of when marketing is following up with leads or seeing someone click through on specific content on the website, they then pass them off to sales to fill the sales pipeline. So this is a similar idea, but I like to call this DevRel qualified leads. I came up with this term after meeting with yet another team who had metrics traditionally given to sales, like how many people signed up on the platform this month, or recruitment, how many applicants did we get this month, or marketing, how many leads did you get at that conference? These are all things that DevRel and community professionals have zero control over. Who knows whether the person that you met at the recent conference will even apply for the job, let alone whether the hiring manager will actually hire them. Maybe their application won't make it through the system because of the one quirky thing about their education, but the hiring manager had said they didn't care and to go ahead and send that person along. Whatever the case may be, your team should not be held responsible for whether or not that individual got hired. You have no say as far as salary, compensation, or any number of other negotiating factors go, or whether they'll be a good fit with all of the other team members. However, you do have control over knowing things about your community members, which puts you in a unique position to make connections that are useful not only for your community, but also for your company. So what does this look like? It might mean passing potential customers off to sales. This could either be a community member that you've met personally or their manager who might be the decision maker. Or maybe you've encountered someone who's answering questions on your forum consistently and has obviously had a very good experience with your product. They might be a good contact to pass off to marketing for a case study. Or perhaps they'd be interested in turning some of their longer forum pieces into a blog post. If you're getting exceptional feedback from a technical individual, passing them direct to product might be a good idea. They'll be able to have a longer form conversation with the technical person and parse the important pieces rather than you playing messenger. Or if you're getting close to rolling out a new feature that a handful of community members have been asking for a long time, maybe you pull them in before it's released to the public for beta testing. Or maybe you've run into a developer advocate at another company who's willing to help out building an integration that will help customers use your products in tandem. So you get the idea. These connections are incredibly valuable and might not have ever happened were it not for the DevRel team's direct involvement in the community who now knows and trusts them. But the key about this is that the DevRel team is not responsible for whether or not that case study gets written. They're not responsible for whether or not the person they passed off to the recruiting manager or hiring manager gets hired. But they are responsible for building relationships in a way that shows value to the rest of the company. So goal number 2, you want to improve the developer's experience. And once we understand what needs our audience has, we can set about doing this. Developer advocates, or the developer relations teammates who have often been a developer in a past life, have a unique advantage here, since they're often able to make tweaks to the product themselves, filing pull requests, changes to the code, or advocating for particular solutions from within engineering. But this is also why everyone on the DevRel team needs to be technically savvy. We're the intermediary between the various departments, but we're also the go-between between the community and the company, which means we need to be able to translate the needs of the community back to the reality of the business, and vice versa. Our ultimate goal for these interactions is to improve the experience the developers have when they interact with our product. There's a super fancy term for this called developer experience. Bet you couldn't have guessed that. It's a fairly straightforward idea, but I really like this definition from HackerNoon. Developer experience, or DX, describes the experience developers have when they use your product, be it client libraries, SDKs, frameworks, open source code, tools, API, technology, or service. Dave McKay gave us another way to look at it. A good developer experience is making it so that a developer will succeed with intuitive decisions rather than informed decisions. And it's this idea that people know what they should be doing next when they get to your website. And that's a part of your documentation process. It's a part of your onboarding process. It fits into all these different things that we mentioned earlier that the DevRel team can be helping with, right? The talks that you're giving at conferences that explain the process by which you came about deciding these next steps. All of those things contribute toward this developer experience. So let me play devil's advocate for a second, because there's a somewhat valid question here if you aren't familiar with the value that DevRel brings to the table. Why do we need a DevRel team to get this feedback and improve the developer experience? Couldn't this just be done with a combination of product or marketing surveys, engineering support, and a technical writer hired to write a good blog post or two or improve the documentation? And this brings us back to the mantra from the start of the webinar. To the community, I represent the company. To the company, I represent the community, and I must have both of their interests in mind at all times. What is it that sets DevRel apart, that makes us uniquely able to fulfill that relationship building and listening and understanding that goes hand in hand with building a community of loyal customers, is that our primary focus and our goals are first and foremost based around the community. This focus and attention gives us the opportunity to build up trust among the community. When they know that we're asking them for feedback so that we can advocate for their needs internally, they're far more likely to be honest with us, because authenticity breeds authenticity. And while it's entirely possible for product and marketing professionals to have this viewpoint as well, their priorities tend to be split between future releases and lead generation. So how does this benefit the community? There's a fairly obvious answer here. A better experience benefits the community because they have an easier time using the product, right? They're able to more easily get onboarded. They have a better experience with the documentation because you've worked with the support team to better explain and resolve some of the major questions. They can easily find answers and also offer answers in the forum. They know that they have a good team of people who has their best interests at heart. So here's the more important question that stakeholders are going to want to know. How does it benefit the company? Well, I could go on about this for hours, but let me try and distill it into a more succinct list. So let's start with the most obvious one. When your customer knows that they're using a product that not only suits their needs, but also working with people who care about their needs, they're genuinely happy with their decision to use your product. As my friend Jeremy Mee says, the core of DevRel is building relationships with developers. And at the core of building relationships is the mantra, developers don't care that you know until they know that you care. And while caring seems arbitrary and a bit ambiguous, there's a direct benefit here. Your care directly results in customers caring, which leads to things like direct feedback. Ask any product person how difficult it is to get solid, consistent, useful feedback from customers. Better yet, Tell them that you know of a way to get solid, consistent, useful feedback from customers, and they'll be eating out of your hand, begging you to let them in on your secret. This next benefit is closely related: engaged and excited beta testers. And they're engaged and excited to be helping you. And also, guess what? They will be giving solid, consistent, useful feedback. Sticking with the product theme for one more minute, with the engaged community of customers, you've suddenly got folks who are very interested in giving you feedback on your product roadmap. Now, you're not always going to be able to implement that feedback, of course, but simply knowing what's important to whom is a huge step in figuring out what to prioritize next. And this is also a big reason why I emphasize the need for a diverse community. You need to know what the problems are for your free or open source customers, as well as your enterprise level customers, or else you're going to find yourself in an echo chamber. Next up, benefit of DevRel is customer retention or reduced customer churn. And this one's fairly obvious. A lower tier customer that you can keep for years is worth far more than the 2 new enterprise customers who churn after a few months, both because of onboarding costs, particularly for companies who have technical account managers, but also because of the amount of time that the sales team invested in bringing that one customer on. So finding people who are there to stay and making their experience good enough that they don't want to leave is a huge benefit to your company. With this customer loyalty comes this next point: external advocates. Suddenly your customers widen the reach of your marketing and sales teams at zero cost. You could have the best sales and marketing teams in the entire tech industry, but your customers are always going to be better at that because, like all of us, developers trust people who are like them. And when your customers become your external advocates, you'll see your marketing and sales go through the roof. When your community starts advocating on your behalf, your reputation grows as well. After all, it's no longer your marketing and sales teams advocating for you, because that's not necessarily going to make waves. It's literally their job. Everyone expects them to do it. But when others start advocating on your behalf, the industry starts to pay attention. They know that there must be something legit about the way that your product works, the way that you're running your business, the way that you're interacting with the technical audience that is unique and special, and they want to be a part of it. Now, if you take advantage of this attention, this industry attention, and you use it as a springboard to explain why you made the technical decisions that you did and how you're doing things differently, say how your product is changing the industry, and you do it in a way that's relatable to your technical audience, perhaps by running things past your DevRel team or your engineering team before releasing it, you have the potential to be seen as an industry leader in your field. This sets you up for future growth, but also allows you to become the HubSpot, the Twilio, the PagerDuty of your field. Your brand is suddenly the one at the top of people's minds when they think about your particular niche. And if you are an industry leader, people start to listen to what you have to say. They understand that you've done the research, you've listened to and invested in your audience, and you will continue to do so in the future. And this last point is one of the ones that's most important to me, because this shows your community that you care about them just as much as you care about your product, because you understand that if the community succeeds, so does your product. We're back to that symbiotic relationship. All right, so now you know what your main goals are for developer relations and the business reasons for implementing a team. So what next? The first thing you have to do is set expectations, and not just with your team, but with your stakeholders throughout the company, your board members, your founder, with everyone and anyone who might be involved in this process. And as we've touched on, your DevRel team is going to be working with pretty much every team. This means your pool of stakeholders is much larger than just the person in charge of the department that you're hoping to put DevRel underneath. So what do I mean by stakeholders? I've used this term a few times throughout this presentation so far. And quite literally, stakeholders are those who have a stake in the business endeavor. Though who your specific stakeholders are will differ from company to company. At an early stage startup, the stakeholders might be the founder and the board. At bigger companies, they're likely the head of the departments, the CTO and CMO, for instance. In short, these individuals have a significant interest in what overarching tasks developer relations will be responsible for, as well as what metrics will be tracked in order to prove value. They will also be directly impacted by the actions of the developer relations team. You can usually figure out who these people are for you specifically by asking some of these questions. First of all, who outside of your immediate department is involved with the project? Next, what team may be affected by the project's outcome? Who gains or loses from the success of the DevRel team? Can you clearly identify the benefit of this relationship for the DevRel team, the benefit of you having a relationship with that stakeholder? And lastly, if your relationship with this stakeholder improves, does it positively impact your team? You'll want to have a meeting with each of these people that you've identified as stakeholders to understand their expectations and help them understand the value that DevRel brings to the table before the team gets too far along, so that you have all of those expectations laid out up front. And now you understand the title of my book. But seriously, helping them understand the value is an integral piece to setting up the DevRel team for success. The key here is finding the business value that resonates with each particular stakeholder. One of the key skills of a DevRel professional is storytelling. Not telling stories as in white lies, but taking the information in front of us and presenting it in a way that makes sense to someone else. Making data, both quantitative and qualitative, relatable to someone else's needs and desires. And this takes some research on your part. For instance, when you're talking to your stakeholders, you'll want a solid understanding of both what the company goals are and where this particular department head or board member is coming from, what their goals are, personal as well as professional, their needs and their shortcomings. And you'll want to focus on the areas where DevRel can offer assistance, expertise, or value within the company. Which departments could be doing more, but they never get the headcount? Which processes could be streamlined if additional help were provided? What's out of the scope for your marketing team? Technical content, for example. Your product team, having one-on-one trusted conversations with your community as someone who both understands your product and what the day-to-day developer life looks like. Or what's out of scope for your engineering team? For example, being the public face of the company at various conferences. Understanding these key points can lead to consensus around not only what the developer relations team is responsible for, but what the overall company goals are as well. And as a consensus builder, you have to understand how each department relates to the overall goals. You also need to know how your work relates to the overall company goals, while at the same time supporting other departments. And this is important because if you can trace your developer relations team goals directly back to the overarching company goals, then establishing value is suddenly a simple process of sitting down with someone and saying, okay, this team goal relates to this company goal in this way, and it directly pushed this company goal forward in this list of ways, and here's the way that we can show you that that happened. So I'm not going to go into goal setting much because I cover it in far more depth in my book, but here's a few tips with regard to creating goals for your DevRel team. First and foremost, create a DevRel mission statement. This mission statement will drive your goals and your metrics for years to come. I know Carrie Jones recently wrote an article about this on Vanilla. That link is on the bottom right. I've also written some articles about it, and I talk about it in the book too. But the main takeaway is that by crafting a singular mission, rather than letting yourself and your team be pulled in a myriad of directions, you narrow down your focus and you can hone in on the items that only you can do. You make it clear not only to you, but to your manager and your stakeholders as well, that you provide distinct and unique business value, which wouldn't be reached without your team in place. The second tip is that all of your team goals should point directly back to the overarching company goals. And I just touched on this a minute ago, but the primary way to remind stakeholders of the value that you provide is to consistently contribute to these overarching company goals. This not only shows that you understand the business priorities, but also that despite the long sell and the time spent building relationships, the activities that DevRel is involved in are worthy of spending time and money on because they continue to push the entire company forward. Number 3, don't conflate work output with goals. This can be so easy to do with developer relations. The goal might be, I'm going to submit 3 CFPs this quarter, or I'm going to create an editorial calendar this month, or I'm going to have 50 conversations with community members at this conference. And while those aren't bad things in and of themselves, and you might have that personal goal for yourself, they're actually great tasks, but they don't show how you're contributing overall value to the company. They show how much money you're spending through travel costs, or how much time you're spending on something that the customers will never see, like CFPs or internal editorial calendars. So instead, set your goals of, I'm going to improve our developer experience through our blog. And part of that is going to be creating the editorial calendar for that month. Or I'm going to increase awareness of our product among developers. So I'm going to submit 3 CFPs this quarter because I think being out and speaking at conferences is an easy and valuable way to do that. Or I want to increase the number of conversations that I have with community members to get direct feedback on our product. Great. My personal goal is to have 50 conversations at this particular conference. So we've covered a lot of ground today, as I promised, and I hope you were able to take it all in. This is why we do recordings, right? So you can go back and watch it again later. But just a quick summary. First, we covered what DevRel is. It's building relationships with and advocating for a technical audience. We also talked about why DevRel needs to be advocated for, despite the fact that it's a buzzword, so that it's properly understood in the tech industry. We touched on the primary goals of DevRel. 1, to understand the audience better so that we can, 2, second goal, improve their experience. We then walked through the benefits of DevRel, including the formation of external advocates and the retention of your current customers. And lastly, we learned how to set expectations with stakeholders so that DevRel is set up for success within the organization. And as always, I love, love, love chatting about developer relations, particularly the topic of how to set up a team for success. If you have in-depth questions that we can't answer today, I know we're going to do questions in a bit, but if you have in-depth questions about your particular company, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation online or via email. But thank you so, so much for having me today. I appreciate your time and your attention.
Awesome. So, I want to thank you, Mary, for an amazing presentation. I think this was a very insightful bit for everyone, and I'm looking forward to people starting to ask their questions in the Q&A panel, so I'm happy those are coming in. But in the meantime, I would like to just tell you a bit about Vanilla Forums, because some people may not know us, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of let you know what we do. And while I'm talking about that, please submit your questions. So first off, I just want to talk about what Vanilla does. So Vanilla is a company that offers a hosted forum platform, and it allows you to engage your customers. And in this way, it would be engaging your developers, empowering your advocates, reducing support costs, and drive loyalty. One of the things that we really care about as well is looking at user experience. So no matter what device that someone's using, be it a mobile, a tablet, or a laptop, the Vanilla Forum will look lovely no matter how or where your developers would be accessing the community. Also, one thing that's really nice, or one of our key things that we like, is our seamless integration. So here's an example of the developer community for Microsoft HoloLens. And as you can see, there's that look and feel of the HoloLens itself that applies into the community, has that nice look and feel. And of course, we're able to connect into such tools as Salesforce or Zendesk or any other tools that you're using. Now, something different as well about Vanilla is our success team, which is trademarked by us, which is a little bit different than maybe some other platform vendors that you may be familiar with. So besides us just giving you a platform, we also offer you support in building your online community. So that's beyond just onboarding. It's really a 3-part thing, which is training so that you're comfortable with using our platform, and also best practices of community management. We also work with on launching, so we take care of migration, and we work with you on a smooth launch plan with very detailed checklists to make sure that nothing bad happens, your SEO stays intact, and of course growing so that you can continue to have growth and continue to have very good success with your community, with your regular checkpoints with our customer success managers. So this all gets included in the price of whatever someone would select from us. And finally, we handle over 3 billion interactions yearly, so we can support communities of all sizes. And certainly we're used by thousands of beloved brands. As I mentioned earlier, we have the Linux Foundation, Xamarin, and many, many other customers. You can check us out at VanillaForums.com, and you can click to contact sales, or you can fill out the form and start a 30-day free trial without a credit card. So with that, I would love to jump into the questions. And Mary, I don't know if you're able to see some of those in there. We've got a whole bunch of lovely ones.
I can, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to put up your information here so that people have it in case they think of questions later that they, I know sometimes people are shy or they don't want to ask, and you were very generous in offering that, but let's jump into that. So I think there's a whole bunch of questions about DevRel events. So would you like to answer? I guess there's two anonymous questions about, the value of sending members to dev-related conferences and events, and then what events would you recommend? I guess those are two of the same that we could probably hit.
Sure, absolutely. So I absolutely think that it's important to send your team to DevRel related events. There's also some awesome community manager events, and I think having your team attend those is huge for just helping them understand that there are other people like them, for exchanging ideas, for learning about different industry initiatives and things that are happening. Just like technical audiences and developers attend events to get encouragement and get to know more people like them, it's incredibly important for DevRel teams to do the same. As far as what events are out there aren't a lot of them. Hoopy, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with, puts on DevRel Con several times throughout the year in various locations. I think this year it's San Francisco and London and Tokyo.
Tokyo.
Cool.
We'll be in San Francisco and London if people want to chat with us in person as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm hoping to make both of those myself. But I definitely agree that people should be attending those. I also think it's important to hook into the various places online. There's so many people that I've heard from in the past few years who have said, I thought I was by myself. I thought I was alone. I didn't realize that other people understood what I was doing. And just having that support and professional development opportunity to learn and grow from people around them is absolutely essential.
Okay. Let's see here. What are some other good ones? So Anthony is asking. Oh, go ahead. Did you see? Go ahead. I was just. I
think you were going to say the same one I was going to mention.
Anthony's question about at what point in a company's growth does DevRel become key, and what works better, online or offline?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, Anthony. Thank you. I have seen a couple companies start DevRel as early as, a 4-person company. And I think it depends on your company, whether you're hiring a full-time person in to do DevRel when you're that small is up to the needs of the company. But I think companies that are able to take a developer first, technical audience first, or customer first standpoint with their product from the start have a leg up in the industry these days when there are so many different products, right? Because people who, even if it's the CEO or a technical marketing person or head of product, if their focus is their customers, they're going to be more inclined to work on things like developer experience or getting feedback from their customers and things like that. So I think the earlier you can start it, the better. You might not have a full-time position available for someone for a little while, or if you do, it might be a mix of technical support and some content and a handful of other items as well. But I've worked with companies that are, 3 or 4 person company, trying to help them understand the key things that they can do to make sure that the developer audience understands that their product is geared towards developers and that company cares a lot about the developer audience that it's serving. As far as online versus offline communities, I honestly think you need a good mix of both, and that's difficult. I think it really depends on what your priorities are as far as which ones you choose to pursue when. I think you need a good online experience, because I think if you're meeting people in person and your online experience is terrible, then it doesn't matter how great your conversation was with them, they're not going to want to use your product. But I think as far as where your community should be, I think it should be in both locations, because the offline experiences help you get to connect with those community members that much more and that much more deeply. you might have some great back and forth conversations online, but then you get offline and you're able to talk through specific points of feedback or get to know someone on a deeper level and build that relationship.
Perfect. And what do you think about his question? I think we have some similar questions about, and does technical, so Anthony's asking, and does technical community manager basically translate to developer relations?
I think it absolutely can. I think, so developer relations is the overarching term, like I mentioned. It's the name of the team, it's the name of the industry, and technical community manager absolutely fits in there. And I think one problem that a lot of companies are running into is they see developer relations and they go, great, we need a developer advocate, and that's going to solve all of our problems. But then they don't have someone who's aware of how to handle and how to manage an online community. And so they wind up with fantastic folks who can go out and speak and do some brand awareness and build the external relationships. But then they go to build a solid online platform and they don't have someone who's experienced with doing that. And so having those two work hand in hand is key. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, like developer advocacy plus community management, right? Developer relations plus community management is really the right way to go about it, I believe.
Okay, let's take a look here. What other? Oh man, there's a lot of questions. So hey guys, keep them coming. That's great.
There are. It's fantastic.
Okay. Let's see here. What about this question here about from Henry? What are your key non-technical traits that you look for in a great DevRel?
That's a fantastic question. Thanks, Henry. The biggest things that I would look for is someone who is empathetic and someone who's willing to listen. So far too often we get people who, are great at explaining technical issues and great at being able to give talks or things like that, but they aren't able to sit down and listen to someone's issues that they're dealing with. And so finding someone who has both of those abilities, is able to explain the technical content and explain the technical principles, but is also able to just sit down and listen and hear the issues that someone is going through. The other one that I think is absolutely essential, but is something that is a growing and learning process, is the storytelling aspect I mentioned earlier. So being able to translate what the community is saying into terms that your marketing team will understand or that the product team will understand, and being able to have those back and forth conversations so that you're able to be the liaison between those groups and then also communicate the value back up to your stakeholders.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. That's great. Let's see. So many good questions. I'm just trying to pair them all together. Matt Waller, do you see that one? Are there any easy strategies you can start using right away to break the mold of your current employer's normal methodologies when creating or continuing the dev process on a product?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks, Matt. That's hard. That's really, really hard. I hear you on that one. I think the best thing to do is figure out why they're doing it the way that they are currently, and then figuring out how that's benefiting the company goals. So if they're, doing things this current way because it significantly helps a particular team or helps a particular goal that everyone's working toward, then that probably makes sense. But if you can figure out a way to do it better or differently that not only benefits your team, but also benefits the company as a whole, then you can build that story. You can build that case for, instead of pursuing things this way, we really need to go this way instead. And I know one example, we had a company that I worked with a few years ago now. We had a breaking change that was minor. It would only impact, 1 or 2% of our customers, but it was still a breaking change in our API. And it was released without letting anyone on marketing know, without letting anyone in the developer relations team know. And it ruined our relationship with a few different community members, some of whom weren't even impacted by that change. But being able to go back and say, look, because we didn't notify people, because there wasn't a plan rolled out in advance, this happened, this happened, this happened. And not only the ways that it impacted our team, but the ways that it directly impacted our relationship with the community and broke some of that trust. And so we sat down and formulated a plan for, in the future, if we have breaking changes, here's the steps that have to get followed, and here's the timeline that we have to meet. And if we don't meet that timeline for whatever reason, it's not just shrug your shoulders, we do the best that we can. Like, if we are supposed to be doing this particular thing 3 months out from this change and it doesn't happen, then the timeline resets. And so working really closely with some of those stakeholders, helping some of them understand the importance of what you're doing and the importance of what you're trying to change, and then getting them on board as allies for the changes that you're making can be huge in making some of these changes company-wide. Because if you don't have support from some of the higher ups, it's unlikely that some of the methodologies are going to change across the board.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Just looking here. Well, Jake has an interesting question here. And I think, there might be some other people here that maybe they joined late or wanted maybe some clarity. His question was, can you describe a bit more about how community management and DevRel are actually different? I see community management being an umbrella, while DevRel is a specific implementation of community management.
Sure. No, it's a great question. Thanks, Jake. I think in the tech industry, DevRel is an umbrella. It's an umbrella term for that particular team. In the larger industries that we're dealing with across the board where community management is relevant, you're absolutely right. DevRel is a specific implementation of community management. I mentioned at the beginning, DevRel is basically just community management for a technical audience. And so that's one of the easiest distinctions to make. And in the case of how the technical industry is viewing developer relations these days, I think they've been drawn toward developer relations versus saying this is the community management team and we have technical people on here, because of the same reasons that I've seen a lot of other teams deal with, right? The community manager is such a convoluted term these days that in some cases people think it's, oh, well, you handle social media or you only do XYZ, right? Whereas there's so much more value to it than just that one or two tasks that we're quote unquote known for. And so I think for the technical audience, for the developer industry or technical industry, I think developer relations is kind of the way to get community management more accepted in non-open source companies. Because in open source companies, community manager is a highly respected title, perhaps not a well-paying title, but a highly respected title at least, because they're the person working with the main management team for the open source project and the maintainers for the open source project. But I think developer relations has kind of become the way to refer to community management within technical audiences to clarify that issue of we're not just doing social media, we're not just doing marketing work, we're doing all of these other things as well for a technical audience.
Thank you. I think that was good clarity.
Cool.
So there's an anonymous attendee here who has a really good question about his internal DevRel role. And, not to put you on the spot, maybe you don't have any ideas, but the question is, what are some ways that I can reach out to internal stakeholders since conferences and events aren't necessary? Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm assuming maybe he has some developers internally that he's trying to get involved in the community. So do you have any?
Absolutely. So it's a fascinating question because I'm seeing more and more companies come up with, it's a developer advocacy position, but it's internal, or it's a community manager position, but it's internal developers. And I think if what you're trying to do is get more developers involved in outward-facing community activities. I think mentorship programs and encouraging them to, write about the projects that they're working on, or apply to speak at a local meetup, or even just get involved in a local meetup, can go a long way. I've dealt with engineering teams a couple different times where, someone will be working on a fascinating project that would be a really cool blog post, and I'll go to them and ask them to write a blog post about it. And they're sitting there going, I haven't written anything for a blog since my live journal back in college. And so I think for some people, just encouraging them to do that and letting them know, hey, I'll sit down with you and edit it along the way and work with you on the structure. And some of the ways that you can encourage that involvement, encourage that creative side even more, is just, have a template for blog posts where it kind of guides them along. Like, okay, tell us about the problem that you're solving. Now talk to us about a couple of the solutions that you found. Now talk to us about how you solved that at the end. And just walking them through the basic introduction, meat of the post, and then the conclusion at the end, and making sure that they know they're not on their own. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of encouragement, that, finding someone who's really good at pair programming and going, I think you might actually be really good at speaking to audiences as well, because you're great at giving tutorials around these things. So finding those people who have those unique skills, the teaching skills, the writing skills, and working with them to implement those skills in other ways throughout your company.
That's great. We're going to have time for one more question, and anyone else, I guess, can email you or contact you out. So I wanted to get to Peter's question, because I think that's kind of an interesting one for people that may not directly be in DevRel, but want to, look at doing marketing. So Peter's question is, do you have any recommendations regarding developer marketing? What should one be careful about, and what to start with?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So developer marketing is an interesting topic. I've actually had a couple of conversations about this recently. And I think there's been this split. I don't think developer marketing necessarily falls under developer relations specifically, but it definitely overlaps a lot, right? And so I think there's more and more marketing departments who are realizing we don't know how to talk to developers. We don't know how to work with them. And so we need to figure out better ways to communicate to them and communicate with them. There's actually a really good book that I've been reading through lately that's a collection of articles from various developer marketers across the tech industry called The Essential Guide to Developer Marketing. And it's put out by Slashdata. And so it gives a lot of ideas of, here's where you can start and here's where you can look at to move forward. I think the biggest thing to be careful of, and this applies to DevRel as well as developer marketing, is just be authentic, be real with your clients, be real with your customers. Don't give people the impression that you can do more than what you're capable of. And I think that's tends to be where marketing can fall down so often in all industries, but in developer relations and in technical industries in particular, because the developers can get online and within 5 minutes see if the marketing team is, BSing them, or if it's true or anything else. And so just be careful to not promise more than you can deliver, and to actually have those conversations with your community members. Same principles apply as with developer relations for the most part. And like I said, there's a lot of overlap, but just being authentic, being open, being honest, providing the content that your technical audience is needing and looking for.
Mary, thank you so much for that answer. And thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it. A recording will be sent out later this week along with the slides, so look for that in your inbox. And once again, the information to contact Mary is here on the screen. So Mary, thank you once again for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us as well. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much.